Hello, everyone. Welcome in. It's time for this week's Sports and Leisure History Look Back. We will be looking back at our history from the week of June 29th through the Independence Day weekend, which ended on July 5th. As always, I'm Jeff Klein, and I am joined by a man of true independent thought, the big sports brain, Clayton Hamilton. How's it going, Clayton?
It is going great. We are right in the heart of the summer. Everything is happening right at this moment, Jeff. I have no time. I have no time. I am about 18 hours plus per day consuming games.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a packed week. We've had World Cup excitement. Can
I
we
went to the World Cup.
I want to hear about that. Yeah. Can we call it excitement? Was it exciting being there?
It was more fun than I thought it would be, but I don't think that the excitement level was worth the purchase price.
Right.
So I think it was overpriced, and I am not going to be booking my flights to Portugal or Morocco or Spain for the next one, or Saudi Arabia for the one after that. And if it does come back here and I'm in my mid 60s, I don't know that I ever want to go through the ticketing problem again of trying to get tickets to it. But at the end of the day, it was fun. It was more fun than going to an NFL game, and I had a great time.
Okay. All right.
But it's not in any way going to get me to start consuming soccer on a club level.
Yeah.
So I will probably be out on soccer until the Olympics.
So is soccer better live than it is watching on TV?
What is crazy about soccer live is you notice some things that you don't see on television. On television, it seems as if the field is very congested and that it is difficult to move the ball. But when you're in the stands and you can see just how wide the gaps are, there is a tremendous amount of room for these guys to navigate and negotiate. And when you see them turning the ball over, a lot of times they're panicking. And that's the difference between a Ronaldo and a Messi and your average guy is Ronaldo and Messi understand the amount of time that they have, and they understand the space that they have, and they're able to navigate that in a way that the average player isn't. But it is not near as congested as it looks on TV. One other thing, though, that made me laugh, Jeff, is both of us go to a lot of baseball games.
Yeah.
And one of the things that always tends to crack me up at a baseball game is when they hit a routine fly ball to the outfield and the entire crowd goes, "Ah!" And then I'm like, what are you doing? Because the ball's landing 20 feet short of the warning track. And I say,
just
look
watch
at
the
that
outfielder.
Right, watch the outfielder. For God's sakes,
exactly.
I understand if you're in the upper deck and you get a bad angle. But the thing that's funny is that it's just like that in soccer. You'll see the guy kick the goal, and you can clearly see this thing is going 5 to 7 yards wide.
Right.
And everyone goes, "Ah!" And I think, did you not watch the ball? Because the ball is nowhere near. At no point when it came off his foot did it have any chance of going near the goal. And that is very obvious in the stands in a way that may be a little bit tricky on TV. But people going crazy over stuff that's 5 to 7 yards. Jeff, that's 15 to 21 feet away from where its intended target is. So I thought that was fun.
I guess when it's like a 1-0 game, a lot of these games end up 1-0, 2-1. Every kick is like, let's hope it goes in and get that one goal, because that could be the difference maker.
One of the things that was funny is that this was a very odd experience for me because I had absolutely no rooting interest either way, which has never happened to me at a game. I couldn't think of a single reason to root for Jordan or for Algeria, and I couldn't think of a reason to root against Algeria or against Jordan. So I was just there to enjoy the experience. But this is also the very first time I have ever gone to a game and not a single person has talked to me. Nobody talked to me at all. Everyone ignored me the entire time I was there. Nobody that worked there talked to me. Nobody that sat next to me talked to me. Nobody that I walked up the stairs next to talked to me. Nobody talked to me in the parking lot. Nobody talked to me at all. Not a single peep from any person in the stadium, which was rare.
That's your dream experience.
I know, right?
Also we had so yeah, World Cup's going on. We had a big announcement from LeBron not returning to the Lakers. Although, maybe that was predicted by some, but
Yeah,
I
so
guess
that was a big notice. Wimbledon has been fantastic, but I don't know if you saw this at the Prefontaine Classic, Jeff, which is the Diamond League stop in the United States. But Tate Taylor, the high schooler, he ran the 200, won it in 19.75 over
wow.
Letsili Tobogo. And Letsili Tobogo is the defending Olympic champion from Botswana, and the teenager from the United States smoked him.
Wow, that's
In
shocking.
1975, I understand for people like, it's only 1975, that only would have been good for fourth at the Olympics. He ran it into a headwind, into a massive headwind. So, big day for you, Tate Taylor.
Well, and before we get to the history, I want to ask you about the Tour de France.
Yes.
I know it's going on right now, and I know you're a massive Tour fan.
And it started with a team time trial with Jonas Vingegaard getting 12 seconds on Tadej Pogacar. And the whole world went nuts, me included, because, wow, you got 12 seconds on the defending champ. That's pretty good in day one. Tadej took 6 seconds back on stage 2. He won today, took another 6 seconds back, and Tadej is already in the leader's yellow jersey, the Maillot Jaune on his back. But they are equal on time. He gets it on tiebreaker count back, but it's going to be a good one. Vingegaard is in great shape. Tadej Pogacar is in great shape. The course looks fantastic. They just went from Spain into France, so hold on to your hats, Jeff. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, and we had the All-Star announcements. We did. You and I made our All-Star predictions. Got some right. Got some wrong, although I think all of ours were right.
I do too. You can't account for the public, which is why somebody like Vladimir Guerrero is starting. He shouldn't even be in the final two. Major League Baseball needs to go back to the way it used to be in the 1980s, where the ballot came out in the stadium and they only put 6 guys at each position, and 18 in the outfield, something like that. But they nominated players so that you didn't have these problems of guys like Vladimir Guerrero, who has no business being voted in.
Well, and if you want to see Clayton and my All-Star predictions, we just did the starting team who we think would be deserving of the All-Star nod. You can check it out on our social media. We are on Blue Sky, Instagram, Substack, X, and YouTube. And you can find us at Sports History SL. That's the letter S, the letter L for Sports and Leisure. So again, Sports History SL. We're on all your favorite or your not so favorite social media sites. And except on Facebook, you can still find us at Sports and Leisure. So just wanted to mention that. For anyone out there who wants to follow some of our sports history posts and other content. We're trying to be engaging, trying to be informative, trying to share the history, share the knowledge. So check it out, comment, share our stuff, and if you comment, we'll probably talk about it on the show. All right, should we get into the history?
Let's do it.
I'm really excited about this one because we had a lot of great baseball history, which I love. And on June 29th, our history post was about back in 2004 when Randy Johnson notched his 4,000th, that's right, 4,000 career strikeouts. He joined a very exclusive club of Nolan Ryan, Roger Clemens, and Steve Carlton. That's it. Those are the only 4,000 strikeout pitchers in the history of baseball. But actually, the interesting thing about the big unit, he was the fastest to reach this milestone. And he did it faster than Nolan Ryan, who had that previous record. So wanted to get your thoughts on that. Big Randy Johnson fan?
I loved Randy Johnson. I thought he was one of the most intimidating pitchers that was out there. And what's crazy about him being able to make it as the fastest was that his major league debut was very late for somebody that achieved the numbers that he did. He didn't debut until he was 25 years old with the Montreal Expos, and he had a pretty difficult time finding the strike zone early in his career. He was only at about a strikeout and a half to walk ratio when he first came up with Montreal. And they gave up on him because he couldn't throw enough strikes and he couldn't strike anybody out. And they shipped him off to Seattle where things finally started to click.
Yeah, he actually led the AL in walks from 1990 to 1992. That's ages 26 to 28. Pretty old as far as kind of figuring it out as a pitcher. Actually, in 1992, he led in both walks and strikeouts. But I found it really interesting, and just reading a little more on Randy Johnson, is Nolan Ryan, who we mentioned, he passed for fastest to that 4,000 milestone. Actually saw something in Randy Johnson that he really related to, because Nolan Ryan was a high walk, high strikeout pitcher, and between Nolan Ryan and the pitching coach Tom House, they worked with Randy Johnson's mechanics, and it was almost instantaneous. He went from leading the league in walks to the next season after working with Nolan Ryan. He dropped to under 100 walks in a season, and he actually placed second in Cy Young voting that year. So it was definitely whatever Nolan Ryan did with him. Well, we know what he did in all the, primarily focusing on when Randy Johnson landed after he threw a pitch, he'd land on his heel, and Nolan Ryan pointed out he's kind of leaking to the third base side. So working that out and getting him to be more intimidating on the mound, because, he's such a tall, lanky guy. He had that intimidation factor. He needs to use that to his advantage.
Well, and the thing that was nuts about that is, one, that made it all the way through the minors with him landing on his heel. Yeah. Because I can't even imagine how you would throw landing on your heel. At no point in the process of throwing in my life have I ever even entertained the idea of landing on my heel. That never would have. I don't even know how you end up there. Yeah. That becomes a thing. In no way, in no sport, it doesn't matter if you're a football player or you're a baseball player, cricket player, like, you always are on the ball of your feet with your step foot.
Yeah.
Forever. And I don't know how that happened.
I wonder if it was one of those things where you see batters with really unorthodox swings and stances, and he was striking out a lot of guys. So, it could have been one of those things where they looked at him and said, well, it's kind of unorthodox, but man, he strikes out a lot of guys, so let's not mess with that. He'll never be, he'll always be kind of wild. But Randy, to Nolan Ryan's credit, as he was winding down his career, he really wanted to mentor Randy Johnson, and he's probably the single biggest influence on his career.
Yeah, it's just crazy that happened. And I also think about, it was really good that Randy Johnson came up when he did. Mm-hmm. Because if he were tooling around now, and you would get these people in baseball ops offices to look at him physically, to see his command issues, but to see how hard he was throwing, that here's a guy that probably would have ended up in the bullpen in a modern situation if he had not come up with the team that he did in the era that he did.
Yeah, I was curious, just speaking of sort of contemporaries, not going with a reliever, but is there a starter that you sort of look at that compares to Randy Johnson? I mean, he's such a unique pitcher. I mean, he really defies as a lefty, we always heard the phrase, crafty lefty and so forth. And mm-hmm. He was such a power pitcher, so you didn't really see that in left-handed pitchers. But is there anyone you can think of that really sort of compares to Randy Johnson, at least somewhat?
I think most people would say Chris Sale is probably the closest. To me, not necessarily so much. He's got that sort of herky-jerky motion Sale does, comes from the side a little bit more than other pitchers. In terms of understanding how to get a batter out, it's more of a guy like CC Sabathia, although Sabathia doesn't throw near as hard. And in terms of sort of mental makeup and being tough as nails, it's a guy like Clayton Kershaw. But Clayton Kershaw is the over-the-top 12-6 curveball. It's not the slider. So for me, there's really not anybody in that starter range that comes close. The closest guy for me is Aroldis Chapman, who is a closer, and they actually have pretty similar numbers in terms of strikeout to walk ratio. Aroldis Chapman is 3.25 for his career, and Randy Johnson was 3.26. But the difference being, 4,135 innings pitched versus 848 innings pitched. So I think if Aroldis Chapman could throw more than one inning every other day, that the closest that you would get is he to Randy Johnson, but they're not in any way the same, given just how durable Randy Johnson was.
Yeah, I thought of Chris Sale. You're right. It's sort of the body motion is different with Sale and Randy Johnson, but they both have that kind of lanky build. Although Randy Johnson's way taller, but I think the sort of the similar pitch style and the shape of their pitches, the fastball, wipeout, slider, both of them sort of they made their career out of. I was thinking about sort of Randy Johnson's sort of career arc, and I wonder if the issues he had early in his career really helped prolong the end of his career, because he pitched to pretty late. He was 45 when he pitched his final season. He's the oldest to throw a perfect game, which he did at 40. And they always say it's not necessarily the innings that a pitcher puts on their arm, but also sort of the torque and the stress. And maybe he was putting additional unnecessary stress with the awkward motions and the less than fluid motion that really Nolan Ryan helped him work out. So you have to wonder if maybe the late bloomer, even though he was throwing a lot of innings earlier in his career, but just the motion and the way he moved his body may have helped prolong him.
And he also developed a two-seam fastball late in his career, around when he got to Arizona, 99, late 98, that really helped him to get outs without having to go to the strikeout. So he ended up getting a lot of ground ball outs early in counts in a way that Greg Maddux did, and that something that he learned just by being in the same area as Greg Maddux. You don't have to strike everybody out. Why throw 6 pitches when 2 will do? Right. And he was willing and he was able to do that when he got on those better teams like he was with Arizona. What's crazy to me when I look back at his career is, how did the Houston Astros not win with him in 1998?
Yeah.
That was nuts, because he had maybe one of his best stretches. He had 11 starts, went 10-1, 1.28 ERA, had 116 strikeouts in 84 innings. And that's a team with Jeff Bagwell and Craig Biggio and Derek Bell and Jose Lima and Billy Wagner and Mike Hampton and Richard Hidalgo. And don't laugh at Richard Hidalgo, because he hit 303 on that team.
He was great. Yeah. I loved Jose Lima time.
Lima time.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite Dodger Lima time.
Right.
But it was the start of Lima time. Lima gets you out. But what a team in 1998, and to lose to the Padres?
Yeah.
The Padres? Ay, ay, ay.
Well, the Diamondbacks were really smart. In their second year of existence, they brought in Randy Johnson, and it really helped that franchise. I think they get really overlooked as a team that was, maybe they weren't like the Golden Knights, who were good in their first season of existence, but second season of existence for a baseball team where they go from 65 wins to 100 wins, and a lot, credits Randy Johnson. A lot of that had to do with him and his effect on that team, and I think the mentality that he brought, and this is something that Nolan Ryan really talked to him about, and we talk so much about analytics and the science behind pitching, and that there's such a focus. But the biggest sort of difference maker that probably took place was Nolan Ryan telling Randy Johnson, you need to be aggressive. You need to own the plate. You need to make opponents afraid of you. I mean, we heard that, the most famous pitcher is probably, Bob Gibson, who everyone was terrified of. But Randy Johnson had that same meanness. And there's always, all kinds of great stories about that. You have the John Kruk 1993 All-Star game. My favorite was Jeff Houston, where he joked that Randy Johnson was so intimidating. What's the worst thing that could happen? That he kills you, in the batter's box. So, yeah, I think that's the thing that really he brought to a lot of teams later in his career. Just that menace, that meanness. And which was great. I mean, it was fun as a fan watching him.
And he fit perfectly into that championship team at Arizona because Curt Schilling is an old grumpy guy, and Mark Grace and Jay Bell, Matt Williams, Steve Finley. They had a whole bunch of those guys, and it fit really well, into what that they were trying to do. But one of my favorite Randy Johnson was the pitch that he threw to Barry Larkin. He threw a slider to Barry Larkin, Hall of Famer Barry Larkin. And Barry Larkin swung at the pitch and missed it, and the ball went between his legs all the way to the backstop. Like, that's how fooled he was. And this is a Hall of Famer, Barry Larkin, swinging at a ball between his own legs.
I mean, you got to figure a lot of that was just sort of self-defense, because he did have a reputation of being a little bit wild. As we know, the walks settled down, but he's still,
he had a ton of guys.
Yeah, and the pitch that John Kruk, I think everyone remembers John Kruk giving up on the at bat during the All-Star game, but the part people don't always remember as much is that a pitch sailed over his head.
Mm-hmm. And his at bat against him in the regular season didn't look any different.
Right.
That was, and of course Larry Walker. He did the same thing to Larry Walker, his old teammate in Montreal.
Yeah, I feel like they're just, I don't even, such unique players. I was going to say once in a generation, but I'm not even sure we'll see someone like Randy Johnson in the next generation of players or future generations. It's just such a unique player, such a unique personality, such a unique career path. Miss seeing him pitch.
Yeah, and it's difficult to be a baseball player and be, what is he, 6'10"?
Yeah.
And who else has been 6'10"? Was it Mark Hendrickson? He played a little bit in the NBA, Mark Hendrickson, and he played for, I think, the Blue Jays. But he didn't have anywhere near the success of somebody like Randy Johnson.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on. A couple other pitchers to talk about. This is more about the game, but in 1963, on July 2nd, we posted about arguably, well, I think most people would agree it's the greatest game ever pitched. Juan Marichal of the San Francisco Giants and Warren Spahn of the Milwaukee Braves, perennial all-stars in their own right. They dueled into the 16th inning at Candlestick Park, the Stick. Both pitchers threw scoreless inning after inning until Willie Mays hit a walk-off home run off Spahn in the bottom of the 16th inning. Is this the greatest game ever pitched by both starters?
I think it must be the greatest game. Just going that far into the 15 and a third for Warren Spahn, 16 for Juan Marichal, and then a home run by Hall of Famer Willie Mays. And these weren't the only three Hall of Famers in this game, Jeff. Hank Aaron was in this game, and Eddie Matthews was in this game, and Willie McCovey was in this game, and Orlando Cepeda was in this game. So that's pretty good, and all of this may never have happened if it hadn't been at Candlestick, with the mighty wind blowing in that knocked down Hank Aaron's home run bid in the fourth inning that, by all accounts, would have been 20 rows deep anywhere except the Stick on a blustery July night.
Yeah, so baseball historian Jim Kaplan wrote a book. He called it the greatest game ever pitched, and it is about this game. And it's been studied by many, many people, including SABR and other baseball historical societies, and everyone concurs. Greatest game ever pitched. I actually researched to try to find anything comparable, and the closest game I could find was on May 1st, 1920, so you're going back pretty far. The Brooklyn Robins played the Boston Braves, so again, the Braves, and they went 26 innings. Both pitchers threw all 26 innings. And it ended at a 1-1 tie because of darkness. But they actually didn't call it a tie. since they didn't finish the game, they replayed the game 2 days later.
They wiped out all their stats.
And they threw 19 innings 2 days later.
Wow.
Boston beat Brooklyn 2-1 on that game. In that game, there was actually some interesting players: Zach Wheat and Rabbit Maranville.
Oh, Rabbit Maranville.
Yeah. Do you know why he was called Rabbit?
I do not.
Because he could probably. My guess is he could steal a lot of bases. Well, I mean, I could figure out about him, but 2 Hall of Famers in that game. But yeah, it's just. I mean, I brought that up because it's one of those. It's such a, for modern baseball, and we can lump this in this 1963 game into modern baseball, but even by any era, it's such a rare thing to see this 16-inning game and pitchers throwing that long. I mean, you don't see that now, of course.
No, not at all. And at least, Juan Marichal was in his 3rd year in the league, but Warren Spahn was 42 when he threw this. And what's nuts is that Warren Spahn, he throws 15 1/3 and he loses, right? Well, in 1951, he threw 15 2/3 and he lost. And in 1952, he threw 15 and he lost. And there hasn't been anybody that has thrown that many 16 innings since Gaylord Perry in 1967. Wow. He threw 16 innings, and that game ended up going 21 innings. But he bowed out after 16. He didn't stick around for all 21. Gaylord Perry and your spitball. What's wrong with you?
And we're not even talking about, I mean, first pitch swinging was a pretty common thing back in the 60s. And we're not talking about hitters going up and swinging at the first pitch and the ball being put in play. Marichal threw 227 pitches in that game, and Spahn threw 201 pitches in that game. And so just crazy that they just kept going and going and going. And the more recent examples of pitchers going long into games that I could think of was Roy Halladay's 10-inning complete game. That was in 2007. Cliff Lee throwing a 10-inning shutout, 2012. But those are, that would be front page news all over the place of that.
Well, you remember Jack Morris in 1991 World Series Game 7 where he threw 10 innings.
Yeah.
And I remember them saying that, if they would have gone out to take him out, he probably would have killed a manager for taking him out. Fortunately for him, he got that Gene Larkin single that drove in Doug Glanville, won the World Series. But we'll never know if he would have made it out for the 11th. But Jack Morris, what a great bulldog he was.
So I know this will resonate with you, but we had someone share our post and comment that he was actually at the game, and he talked about as a kid taking the public transportation to the stadium, and I don't know if it was called the BART back then, but he grew up in San Francisco, and he went and he was there and he was talking in a comment that he shared, talking about the experience of watching that game, and greatest baseball game he's ever seen, of course. And then he commented and said, that would never happen today. They'd pull him out early and the bullpen would come in and screw it all up.
Yeah, they absolutely would. I mean, they were just talking the other day. I think Brady Singer had like 30 pitches in an inning, and they were like, oh, well, he's not going to make it to the 5th today because he had that 30 pitches in one inning. Right. But that game was a tidy 4-hour and 10-minute affair. And I wonder if the person that had posted that, if they still have the pin. Because at Candlestick Park, they used to give you a pin that said you survived a game at Candlestick if it went past midnight and you stayed all the way to the end of the game. It was like it had like icicles coming off of the logo, and it was one of those little, I don't know, it's like yay big, about the size of a bottle top pin they used to give. So I wonder if he's still got that pin.
That's awesome. I love those little like gimmicky things that are like the longer they're at the game. I was at the Max Muncy World Series game that went, was it trying to remember offhand, 16 innings, I believe. Mm-hmm. And they did at the 14th inning. I don't know if you've ever been to a game through the 14th inning, but at least at Dodger Stadium, They say, everyone please rise for the very traditional 14th inning stretch.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a thing around
Yeah.
town. But I was just at San Francisco, just at a Giants game, and it was cold. It was
Yeah.
cold. People that I were with were freezing.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that stadium. I want to move on to another Bay Area baseball historical moment. Um, and this is in 1987, where Mark McGwire of the Oakland Athletics became the first rookie ever. This was on July 5th in 1987. He became the first rookie ever to hit 30 home runs before the All-Star break. He had 3 more before the break. It was a banner year for Big Mac. He hit 49 that year. He won AL Rookie of the Year. He placed 6th in MVP voting. And that record stood until 2017 when Aaron Judge, the rookie, hit 52. And then 2 years later, Pete Alonso hit 53. He was with the Mets at the time. So we've just been talking about some great pitchers. This was a big sort of year where we saw a shift towards more power being introduced into baseball. This was everyone remembers Mark McGwire and the PEDs and steroid connections, but for all accounts, this was before he did PEDs, right?
Yeah, this was his rookie year, 1987, the PED time. I think he did say that he experimented with it, once in 88 or 89, and then it wasn't until the mid 90s when sort of everyone was on it that it became a thing. But this was really when you started to see a shift, not only in how a game was played, but in roster construction. And the A's were at the forefront of that, of bringing in just power guy after power guy after power guy. Jose Canseco had made his major league debut the year before, so this was the beginning of the Bash Brothers. I don't know if you remember in 1987, but Reggie Jackson had also returned to the A's. He was on this squad. Mike Davis was a 20-plus home run guy on this team as well. And even when Reggie Jackson, was gone the next year, they replaced him with Dave Parker, who is another Reggie Jackson type guy. Dave Henderson, we all remember, hit home runs. Ricky Henderson hit home runs. So it was really kind of the beginning of let's stop with the 300 hitting slap hitters who steal bases, the Vince Colemans of the world, and let's start stacking spots 3 through 6, 3 through 7 with 20 plus home run guys.
Yeah, George Bell, who was the MVP in the American League that year, he hit 47 home runs, didn't quite reach McGwire's 49. He had better across the board numbers as well. But yeah, it's interesting because, there are some questions. Mark McGwire's brother Jay says he introduced him to steroids in '88, but his power was really prevalent. And interesting thing about the steroids and the PED use, and a lot of people associate that with wanting to have more strength and more power. And sure, there's a lot of players using it for that. But as we saw, as we moved into the juiced era, and a lot of players who've since come out and talked about it, or it's obvious when they started using it, was for recovery. It was for endurance. I love watching Eric Gagne pitch, who's, doing, had his best years using PEDs. And his was all for endurance. It wasn't for strength, so he could recover and pitch max effort every game that he goes out there. And I think for Mark McGwire, it was similar, right? He was wanting to recover quicker from surgeries and injuries, and he wanted to just get back to his playing level quicker. And that's the thing that really impacts players, whether you're doing PEDs or not. It's the long grind of the season, and you get dinged up throughout the season. And Mark McGwire, tried to kind of work around that and find a way to compensate.
And there certainly is a difference, sort of not just physically, but in terms of his flexibility and his strength and body type. If you look at him and you look at Canseco in this 87, 88, 89, they were thin, they were fast, They were like Barry Bonds. I mean, remember Barry
Right.
Bonds was stealing a bunch of bases. He was thin, he was fast. He was more like Ken Griffey Jr. Than he was left-handed Babe Ruth. And then as the years went on, they bulked up, and their flexibility didn't translate because of the muscle mass, and it became something else. But if you look back at those highlights when he was, like I said, not needing the recovery because he's 24 years old, 25, he was an entirely different player, but massive power and much better defensive first baseman, I think, than he probably
Yeah.
gets credit for. But if you asked Mark McGwire though about this time, he would say, "I'm not here to talk about the past."
Right. Well, and I think he has been probably more honest, at least in recent years, than a lot of players have been who used. And I always think of Mike Schmidt as probably one of the most honest players when asked about PEDs. Now, he didn't use PEDs, but he said, yeah, if I was able to use something that would have helped me hit home runs, I probably would have used it if that was available. And I think there are a lot of players who kind of looked at that looking for an edge. The thing that really bothers me about the juiced era and the demonizing of a lot of players, and I'm not condoning use of PEDs, it doesn't bother me as much as a lot of fans. I'm kind of indifferent on it. Like, it happens, it shouldn't, people shouldn't do it, but I also get why someone of that mindset is looking for that competitive advantage. But the thing that really bothers me is that during that era, media was making a lot of money, baseball was making a lot of money, teams were making a lot of money, and everyone was turning a blind eye to what was going on, because if it was as prevalent as everyone agrees it was, everyone knew what was going on, and it was sort of that dirty secret that no one talked about. And there, this revisionist history that goes on, where now the players are the ones getting demonized when everyone else went and cashed a check to make money off of it. That kind of bothers me about that era and sort of the judgment that people lay on players from back then.
And it also is that misunderstanding that PEDs equal success.
Right.
Because if you look at the Mitchell report, FP Santangelo is
Right.
on that list.
Just thinking that.
Adam Pyatt is on that list. He was the ringleader, Adam Pyatt, and he was not good at all. So you still have to hit the ball.
Right.
And, guys like Mike Schmidt, they just did it in a different way, because Mike Schmidt was he wasn't unfamiliar with greenies and amphetamines,
Right.
which help these guys, recover and get back out there. So
Absolutely.
it's all relative. You sort of put it in the context of what it is. And I've never been a fan of trying to erase history, no matter how ugly it is, or to act like history is something different than it was. Let's just look at it for what it was and why it happened in the era in which it happened, and ask ourselves the three questions. What did they do right? What did they do wrong? How could they be better? And I think if we ask ourselves that in any situation, what did I do right today? What did I do wrong today? How can I be better? Instead of focusing on, what does this make me look like? And I want to erase this history because I don't agree with it, or I want to make it seem as if it's something else. Like let's just treat history the way it is, and let's learn from it. But let's not act like it's different. Let's not act like it's something else. And that means we take the bad from good people and we take the good from bad people.
Yeah, I mean, people are a sum of their parts, right? Everyone has there's everyone is not 100%. I agree with you. There's bad parts, there's good parts. Totally on board with that. But one thing that I've listened to some discussions on this, and I found some interesting points made where there's already players who have done PEDs and steroids in the Hall. Now, during these interviews, they haven't said they're not going to say who. They don't want to out anyone. But the argument that was made is that steroids became popular in gyms in the 50s. And a lot of these players were going to the gyms, working out with bodybuilders, and being introduced to all kinds of drugs. And there's players probably from the 50s who were taking steroids, and according to some players, some of those are individuals who are now in the Hall of Fame. And so I think it's a lot more complicated history than people want to write it off to be, oh, the juiced era is all, you can't trust any of the numbers from the juiced era. It's all fake. Everyone was just, doing drugs, and we should just ignore that era. And I think, you take those stats for what they are from that era.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, it's no different than, you look back at some of the misconduct from people in the late 1800s, up, or through the early 40s or beyond. It is what it is. And let's just be honest about it and say, this is what they did, and this is when they did it, and go from there. But to act like it didn't happen, I don't know. That just seems silly to me. It just seems silly. What I do like about this post, though, Jeff, is that we all got to remember that Oil Can Boyd was,
that's right,
was in the big leagues, because he's the one that gave up the old home run. And did you know, speaking of Mark McGwire, that his teammate in college at USC was one Randy Johnson?
That's right. Yep. Randy Johnson. Yeah, that's great. A lot of connections there. All right, so let's move on from baseball because I love tennis. I love Wimbledon, and that is ongoing right now. And we had a great history post about Wimbledon. It was actually on July 4th back in 1993 on Independence Day, where Pete Sampras and Jim Courier played in an All-American Wimbledon final. It was Sampras won his first of 7 Wimbledon championships, which for a while was the record until Federer passed him up. He beat a talented field. He beat what turned into his sort of ongoing rival in Andre Agassi in the quarterfinals, and then he beat defending champion Boris Becker of Germany in the semis. But such a fantastic era. I love this era of Wimbledon. I love the personalities and the players and the style of tennis that we saw during that era.
Yeah, if you want to talk about what makes a television executive happy, it's a Wimbledon semifinal that has Sampras and Agassi on one side, and Becker and Jim Courier on the other, and all those guys going through the quarters and the semifinals together, and that's what's spectacular, because the guys that were in this era, the Michael Chang and Gustavo Kuerten and all of those guys, Stefan Edberg, that really created this huge, not the big 2 like we have now with Sinner and Alcaraz, or the big 4 like we just came off of, but this was like the big 10, the big 12 of guys that could win tournaments. And it wasn't like they weren't any good, and so we're just stuck with these 12 guys that could win. Like, you had 12 guys that were Hall of Fame talent, all competing at the same time, and Pete Sampras was the best of the best.
Yeah, and I feel like Pete Sampras has kind of been lost to history a little bit, but really a lot of the current players that are dominant that we watch or have, winding down their careers now, Djokovic, Federer, Nadal, that style of tennis really came from Sampras. He was the one that popularized that really aggressive, fast court play, forearm, just the style, and not the serve and volley sort of style that we saw prior to Sampras' era. So a lot of the roots go back to this early 90s era of tennis that he popularized.
Yeah, and it was a serve and volley, but not in the way that we remember it, with the sort of 1 foot PK ballet turn net play.
Right,
it was power play, but power play at the net for Sampras, and he would routinely have 120 mile an hour second serves, but he wasn't content to just stand at the baseline and bang like you see a little bit today. I think now we're sort of going back to the days of standing at the baseline and banging until somebody makes an error, or trying to create court position off of the return. He was willing to force the action very much in the way that we see women's tennis players today play. There's a lot, that's what I love about women's tennis in the current era as opposed to men's tennis, is that women's tennis forces the action. And they force the action through angles and through net play. And that's what Pete Sampras did. He forced the action through angles and net play, which always made it crazy to me that the media didn't fall in love with Pete Sampras. They thought he was boring.
Yeah.
That maybe he's a boring interview, but his game is not boring to watch.
Well, and he contrasts that against Andre Agassi, who was flamboyant and dynamic, and Sampras was stoic, and they were almost sort of polar opposites, in not just personality, but in their style of play, which I think probably frustrated TV, but it also made this really interesting dynamic that you have sort of the straight-laced sort of Pete Sampras against the wild child Andre Agassi. And that's sort of how it played out on TV. But, that's maybe why I feel like he gets a little cheated a little bit in history because, for how good he was, I don't know if he gets remembered as much. Agassi gets remembered, obviously, and he was a great player in his own right.
Yeah, but Pete Sampras has more majors.
Right.
And Pete Sampras beat him significantly. Yeah. But like you said, styles make fights. And that's why we remember Frazier Ali, because Ali was Agassi and Sampras was Frazier. And that's what made it interesting. But it wasn't just, the long hair versus the, clean-cut Pete Sampras image and the way that they sort of carried on their life. It was that what Sampras did well, Agassi was able to counter well, and vice versa. So if you look at, who was the best server at the time, it's Pete Sampras.
Right.
Who was the best returner of serve at the time? It was Andre Agassi. Who was the best player at the net? It was Pete Sampras. Who was the best at hitting winners and passing shots? Andre Agassi. And so that contrast in the game was just exacerbated by the contrast in their personalities, which made for really fascinating and compelling tennis. And then you throw in Jim Courier, who's at the time who's sort of an amalgamation of the two of them, and you have Michael Chang, who is just sort of all over the place and quick and exciting and fun to watch, and you have Stefan Edberg and Boris Becker, who were sort of, if you thought Pete Sampras was stoic, watch Boris Becker and Stefan Edberg. And so that whole just mix of players was a really great time. And I think you are right that Pete Sampras gets a little bit undervalued because of his 14 majors. And you start to, you look at Nadal with his 24 and Rafa and Federer 22 and 20. But Pete Sampras retired with the most.
Right.
When he retired was it 14? Was the most at the time that he retired. So,
do you think though he gets because he never won the French?
Correct.
And so maybe that is something that sort of is a knock against him because
he does not have the career Grand Slam,
right?
Which is unfortunate. He also didn't have Olympic success.
Right.
Pete Sampras, but I think that certainly does. But I think most of it with him has to do the fact that he wasn't flashy and he didn't seek attention. The most exciting thing that he ever did off the court was he married Bridget Wilson, who was the teacher from Billy Madison. Remember the actress Bridget Wilson?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, he married her. And not only did he marry her, but he married her and they had a couple of kids and they're still married and they're happy. And he was never in the tabloids and he wasn't at cool parties and he wasn't having domestic violence issues with his Hollywood wife. He just married somebody that he loved and stayed married to them, and they still are, and they're still happy, and that doesn't sell anything. But that's the wildest thing. That's the wildest thing in Pete Sampras' career, is that he had the cojones to ask Bridget Wilson out on a date.
Yeah, he didn't play to the crowd either.
No.
Right? Where Agassi loved to play to the crowd and get them kind of worked up in his favor. One thing that Pete Sampras, I just wanted to mention this point about his game. He proved that to win at Wimbledon and win in the U.S. Open specifically, but I think this kind of carries to across the board. But in those tournaments, just because of the style of play in the court and so forth, you really need a dominant serve and the ability to finish points quickly. And that's something that today really drives me crazy with players that I love watching. And I just watched Tiafoe, and it drove me. You saw that match, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like that was such classic Tiafoe, where he just couldn't close out, and he kept having these long sets, and then eventually he's out. He gets gassed, and I think Sampras sort of is complete opposite of the sort of fundamentals that Pete Sampras professed.
Yeah, Sampras was clinical. But it's not to say that Pete Sampras wasn't tough. And
Right.
a lot of times Pete Sampras gets always soft. He's laid back. He's from Palos Verdes. He's, sort of a, just kind of a cool guy. But remember, I don't know if you remember the Davis Cup when he collapsed. Like he cramped up and collapsed. They had to carry him off the court, but he didn't collapse until after match point.
Right.
And then in the U.S. Open when he threw up in the quarterfinals on the court,
right.
and then it came back and won. So he was tough, and he would gut it out, but he didn't waste energy, and he didn't waste points. And part of that goes back to early in his career when he was in his second major final at the U.S. Open, and he played Stefan Edberg, and he said he learned that day because he got to the final, and he said he really wasn't that into it. Because he was like, I made the final, I won it last year, and I'm back, and I'm just kind of happy to be here. And he said Stefan Edberg just ran him out of New York City, and he never wanted to feel that way again because he realized that he can't take any match at any time lightly, and anything less than winning is a failure. He's Ricky Bobby. If you ain't first, you're last. Right? And he learned that day very early on not to throw away opportunity. And that's something that I feel like when you watch Tiafoe, the Tiafoe's like, I'll get the next one.
Right.
And there may not be a next one, right? Remember what Moonlight Graham says. Like, you don't realize on the day that that's the only day. And that's something that gets frustrating for me also with Tiafoe, with Paulo Badosa, with any number, Daniel Collins, players that they're so close and they can't close the deal like a guy like Pete Sampras who just had that inherently inside him.
Yeah, and going back to your point that it doesn't mean he wasn't tough. It's just you use your energy and conserve for the times that you need it. And I think Djokovic is probably the best modern example of that, where the guy has amazing endurance, but he doesn't waste energy. And so he when he needs that endurance, he needs to outlast his opponent. He can easily do that because he hasn't wasted points. He hasn't gone unnecessarily long in sets. It hasn't said, well, every point matters.
He's not burning calories flexing, and he's not burning calories yelling at the crowd. It's head down, next point.
Right.
And which, like I said, is boring for media guys who maybe don't know what to write about the match, and so they want to write about personalities because that's easier than understanding what's happening during the match. But that's what I liked about Pete Sampras. For me, Pete Sampras is the Tim Duncan of tennis.
That's a great comp. Yeah. Okay, so we had a rare NFL historical note for the summer. On June 30th, 1965, the NFL announced that it approved ownership of the Atlanta Falcons to Rankin Smith Sr. At the time, Smith paid a then record $8.5 million. The team would be sold in 2002 to Arthur Blank for $545 million. Not bad profit for the Smith family.
Good return on the investment.
It's very good. Linebacker Tommy Novus out of Texas was their first draft pick. So I want to kind of start this conversation and ask you, how important was it for the NFL to establish a franchise in the Deep South?
It was of the utmost importance because we tend to think of sports just being everywhere in the country all the time because that's just the way that they were. But there was no presence in the Deep South among any sport until around this time. Now, the Miami Dolphins came in the year prior, but we all know that Miami is not the South.
Right.
It's too far south culturally. It's a whole different animal. There was no Jacksonville. There was no Tampa Bay. There was no Carolina. There was no Tennessee Titans at the time. There was nothing. The closest teams were, you're looking at the Houston Oilers and the Dallas Cowboys.
Right.
In Atlanta, this sort of geographic hub, the Chicago of the South, was not just without a football team, but they were without sports until 1966, when the Milwaukee Braves moved down to Atlanta. And then the St. Louis Hawks in 1968 moved to give them an NBA franchise. And so they went from 0 pro teams to 3 pro teams in a very short period of time. And then they picked up in 1972, the Atlanta Flames were an expansion hockey team. We all think of them as being the Calgary Flames. We forget that they originated in Atlanta, but they went from nothing to 4 sports teams within a 8-year period. But it was a huge coup for the city of Atlanta and for the South to be able to say that they finally have a team of their own.
Yeah, and I think that was all those teams that you highlight moving to Atlanta or emerging in Atlanta. They were really growing as a media market, and they went from a sort of a pretty small media market, and by the late 60s they were a top 10 media market. So they were really on the rise, and I think the NFL had this vision, seeing how you have a built-in fan base because of how popular college football has been in the South, and so they had this plan where they wanted to grow pro football and have it sort of run concurrently with college, right? So you have college on Saturdays and then pro on Sundays. A few years after, well, really a couple of years after Atlanta, you had the New Orleans.
The Saints the same year. They came in together, the Saints and the Falcons. So they really took an investment and said, hey, we're going to really highlight the South. We're going to New Orleans. We're going to Atlanta. Those are the 2 hubs of what the South is. Let's not forget, Nashville at the time was not near what Nashville is now. But it's that media market that you're talking about, that Atlanta is more than Atlanta. Atlanta is Georgia. Atlanta is North Florida. Atlanta is Alabama and Mississippi and Arkansas. And it's Tennessee. It's South Carolina. It's North Carolina. It's even into Southern Virginia. It's Kentucky. It's that entire SEC footprint that now has televisions because it's 1966. And you are able to air these games. That gives you something regional. And you're also not too much competing with long-standing allegiance, because the NFL and pro football is really still in its infancy. That you don't have the adherence to, well, my family's been a Cincinnati Bengals fan for 35 years. Like, 35 years didn't exist. It was a really smart move in order to say, hey, we're going to capture all of these existing fans, and you may be Ole Miss and Georgia and Vandy and South Carolina on Saturday, but on Sunday you're all Atlanta Falcons fans.
Yeah, and I think some people might think, well, they're, the teams in Texas, but really that's a completely different region.
Texas isn't the South. Right. It's like Miami. It's not the South. Right. It's in the South. It's not the South.
Yeah, and I think they benefited from the rise of these other teams because the TV contracts and the regional TV coverage meant that there was sort of some spillover to their own sort of rise in their popularity, and their the Cowboys weren't really the Cowboys that we think of now. They hadn't had that sustained success at the time that the Falcons came into being, but this really allowed that whole football to really take on a new sort of identity in a part of the country that was really heavy in college football.
And it was at a time in the South where people needed something to agree on. Because this is Jim Crow South. This is at the height of Dr. Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement that's causing immense divide throughout Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Tennessee, all of these places. And all of a sudden, in the midst of the 1966 Summerhill riot and the 1967 Atlanta riots, and all the things that happened at the Dixie Hill Shopping Center, you've got a team that comes in that says, we all are Atlanta. And the stadium that they built, which became Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, that's not a place that's segregated. That's a place for you and for me and for, the guys down the street and the people on the other side of town, that Falcons football, Hank Aaron and Braves baseball, soon to be the Atlanta Hawks, that we have an identity of who we are, not who you are and who I am and who they want us to be. We all get to be Atlanta. And it was the perfect time in a perfect space to create the allegiance and the loyalty that the South carries for the Braves and the Falcons and the Hawks.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point that you bring up, because this has actually been a storyline ongoing right now with the World Cup. How it's been such a kind of a sports being a unifier of, everyone's kind of rallying around, whether it's, countries coming to the U.S. as visitors and communities sort of rallying around those teams that are visiting and playing in those cities, or sort of people in the U.S. really all sort of, jumping on board and following the U.S. soccer team, and just kind of getting behind sports in general with the, the excitement of the World Cup. And I think that's a great point about just how it brings communities together. It gives people something to rally around, and we see that a lot as franchises grow and sports teams grow in communities.
Yeah, in Atlanta, it's being a great place with a wonderful football heritage. It's a college town. It's Georgia Tech is there. John Heisman, the guy that created the forward pass, he was the head coach at Georgia Tech. So it was completely ingrained in the society of the Atlanta area. Athens is, a real close drive to the Atlanta area. So yeah, I think the Falcons sort of came in at a perfect time into a culture and a land area that was starving for them and ready for them. When they had their season tickets, they sold 45,000 season tickets in 54 days.
Wow.
Which eclipsed the 26,000 that they had sold in Minnesota when the Vikings came into existence. That was the most that anyone had ever sold, 26,000 season tickets. And, here they are in 54 days, with 45,000, which, if I recall, was probably pretty close to what old Atlantic Fulton County Stadium could hold.
How did they do that without the internet and all the lottery system?
I know, right? If only I could have gone to the World Cup and gone to the ticket window and paid them cash, and they would have given me two tickets, and I didn't have to get an app that updated 19 times, including the ticket that wasn't even ready 12 hours before. It's like 6 hours before the game, and I don't have my QR code to get in. My God. But yeah, I don't know how they did it. But it's funny because we do think about that, but that was 60 years ago, 1966, right? 60 years ago that the Falcons came into existence. And you think about, by the time that you have memories, you're like about 5 years old, right? So somebody that was 65 today that's getting ready to collect Social Security, they've only known the Falcons, right, in their life. But if you go back 65 years from when the Falcons were in existence, like you have people that are born at the turn of the century, like 1901. That's how long the Falcons have been around, like in our life. But if you go back to when they're created, like you think about, you're almost at the 1800s, or that's crazy. To think about that the Falcons are kind of still a new team, but they're all that we've known.
Right.
Is knowing the Falcons, and unfortunately, I wish they would go back to those stunning red helmets with the white face mask.
I have a friend who's a huge
logo.
I have a friend who's a huge Falcons fan, and I said, "Oh yeah," I said, "Oh wow, the Falcons only had 2 owners in their franchise history," and his reply to me was, "Can we get a third?"
Hey, you know what? You say what you will about Arthur Blank, but Arthur Blank cares about Atlanta, and he spends a lot of money. And we were talking about the civil rights movement and how Atlanta was really a hub for a lot of what Dr. King was doing. And Arthur Blank donated $17 million to the National Center for Cultural and Human Rights Museum. And so he is somebody that has always been sort of at the forefront of the cause. And even if he can't put together a good offensive line, he has been very active in the community.
Okay, well, let's move on. We have a few more minutes left. Our final history post, which was actually two different posts, was about racing. So let's close out talking about that. So the first one was on July 1st, 1952, where NASCAR went international with their first race in Canada. They ran at the They ran their Grand National Series, now known as the Cup Series, at Niagara Falls in Ontario. Buddy Schumann, driving the Hudson Hornet, won the race. And on July 3rd in 1977, probably one of the most famous drivers in motorsports history, Mario Andretti, driving for Lotus Ford, won the French Grand Prix. It was his third win in 1977. He won one more race that season, finished third in the standings. However, the momentum carried him to the next year, where in 1978, he won his first and only Formula One. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about NASCAR versus Formula One and sort of some of the marketing that's gone on, because you have NASCAR really is appeals to U.S. fans, and Formula One's a little more popular internationally outside the United States. And I know you and I have had pretty extensive conversations around sort of marketing and racing and what they could do to improve. So curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I think if you look at just these two particular instances, Mario Andretti and then NASCAR in Canada, and then see which one is more prevalent now than from where it began. And easily it's Formula One has a greater presence in the United States than NASCAR does internationally. Mm-hmm. Even though NASCAR has been successful in the creation of sort of a minor league system, which they had never really had before. It was just the NASCAR Cup and that was it. And they've really started to develop the Xfinity Series over the past 20-something years. And they've branched out internationally to have a series in Canada. They have a series in Brazil. They have a series in Mexico that's developing drivers and owners and pit crews and helping to create marketing strategies and business partnerships as it continues on. But they have been unsuccessful in having sustained races in different countries in the same way that Formula One has a couple of races here each year. They're always in Austin. They're here in Las Vegas now. They're down in Miami. So they've got 3 races on the calendar in the United States. They also go up to Canada and Mexico. But Formula One had a huge head start in that Formula One has always sort of been international, and they haven't had to try and capture the Asian market because they're already running races in Asia, and they're already running races in the Middle East, and they're running races in Australia. And that's part of their sort of worldwide branding in a way that NASCAR has not been able to add, even one race of any sustainability anywhere, including Canada.
Yeah, one thing I think that's really interesting that Formula One does is they work with the local culture and sort of local sponsors to make it feel like a native event from within that country, whereas sort of NASCAR makes it feel like they're importing their sport to whatever market outside the United States. And I think the Vegas probably is the most high-profile one that I'm aware of, where it's kind of a destination, right? And they work with a lot of celebrities and local sponsors, and it feels like an organic event where they're making it more than just about the sport. They're making it an event. Whereas NASCAR feels like they're focused on more sort of narrowly that this is the sport and we're going to bring the sport to you.
Yeah, I would say that that's mostly accurate in that Formula One racing is so much less about the racing.
Right.
If you go to a Formula One event, it's a bunch of people standing around talking to each other like they're at a bar.
Right.
Drinking, free luxury drinks. They've made it like a luxury brand that you go to Formula One not to watch the race. You go to Formula One to be seen at the race and to post to your Insta in your TikTok and whatever else you post to, because it's about showing off. Like, you're showing off that I'm at the Formula One event, and it's about aligning yourself with a luxury brand. Oh, well, Gucci purses are here, or champagne, and look at me, look at what I'm doing. Where NASCAR is really about the fan experience. It's about hanging out with your friends. It's about tailgating. It's about the race. It's about being with the people that you're there with, not showing off to the people that couldn't get in. And that doesn't necessarily translate internationally, because there's not a tailgate culture really anywhere else other than the United States. And there's not even a tailgate culture in every part of the country. If you go to a UCLA football game, it's not going to Ole Miss. Right. If you go to Ole Miss, you're going to see professional tailgaters. You see, this is how you do it. This is what a pregame tailgate is. You go to Stanford, no, it's not. It's not at all what it's like going to Mississippi State, or Alabama, and so that sort of regional culture, which is thriving in that area, has translated so well to NASCAR. But it's very hard to import it because people are like, I don't understand. You mean you bring your own food and you eat in the parking lot? I don't get it, right? Yeah. The French cannot wrap their head around that, even though they will go and have a picnic on the side of the road waiting for the Tour de France for 3.5 hours for it to whiz by, and then they go off and do something else. So they're tailgating, but they don't know that they're tailgating because they're sort of doing it on their own, as opposed to the sort of culture that NASCAR has created. And also too, with NASCAR, they've been unable to get European and Asian racing fans to rally around oval racing. And there really aren't that many ovals around the rest of the world. I mean, it's all street courses around the rest of the world for the most part. And that's something that has been a hindrance when it comes to NASCAR, because you can't just put an oval anywhere.
Yeah, I think the sort of the points you raise about sort of those differences with NASCAR and Formula One, I think that's the way Formula One wants it, right? They want it to be an event. It's. I think you're describing it objectively, not in a dismissive way, because that's what Formula One is going for, and I think it's really prevalent in sort of the modern 2026 sort of way that media is done, with a lot of streaming and selfies and sort of user content created to promote the event and show off that I'm at this exclusive event. You want to be here too, and that works for a lot of people, especially young audiences who maybe would never really be interested in racing, but they are interested in following what's going on with Formula One.
Right, and where they have a difference, or why they have to do this. One is because the racing isn't nearly as compelling as an IndyCar race or a NASCAR race. I think we've talked about it a number of times about how it's really about how you build the car, less about how you're able to drive the car. But they have to make these events so grand because they still have to keep you there for an hour and a half to 2 hours, as opposed to the Kentucky Derby, where you only have to pay attention to the race for 2 minutes.
Right.
And the rest of the time you get to be, oh, look at my suit, look at my hat, look at these flowers that I'm carrying, all these other non-racing things. And with something like the Kentucky Derby, for a lot of people that are experience seekers, not horse racing fans, it's once a year, right? It's once a year. So they can go and do that. And that's what the Formula One's trying to make it. It's once a year in your area. So you better not miss it when it comes to Las Vegas, because it's a pain in the ass to get over to Dubai for the next one.
Right.
So, let's make it an event in your area, and let's jack up as much of the price as we can so that you feel like you're getting something, even though, at least for me, the fastest way to turn me off is to overprice something. But I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, if I'm not spending more than I earn, then I am not getting value.
Right.
But for me, that means you're just spending a lot. It goes back to the World Cup that I just came from. I remember I sent you a picture because they were charging $850 to park at the stadium.
Right.
And so, like everybody else, I parked for $130, which is still $100 too much. It's still $130 too much, but it's $100 too much to walk for a half an hour to get to the stadium. And you get there and the whole thing's empty, like the parking lot, because who wants to pay $150? So they priced themselves out.
$850.
$850, right? Yeah, they priced themselves out at $850.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. It's not a value. It's just expensive.
Yeah. All right, Clayton. Well, I'm just going to say this. If I do go to Formula One, I am definitely doing a selfie and making everyone jealous that I'm at Formula One event and you're not. So
yeah, well, that will absolutely. Hey, there's one other thing I forgot to tell you. Do you know who the very first quarterback of the Atlanta Falcons was?
Offhand, I don't remember.
Randy Johnson. Boom.
Wow, that's a
different Randy Johnson.
Different Randy,
but still Randy Johnson.
All right, well, we're gonna wrap it up on that note. That's a nice little tidbit there, and a little nugget. Appreciate you being here as always, Clayton. Always enjoyed the conversations. So for everyone out there, if you like this history, want to learn more, there's a new history post every day, which we always wrap up on this pod at the end of the week. Remember, follow us on your favorite social media at Sports History SL. That's Sports History, the letter S and the letter L for Sports and Leisure. And you can find us at Blue Sky, Instagram, Substack, X, and YouTube. And then you can find us on Facebook as well at Sports and Leisure. Follow us, comment, share. We always like to hear your thoughts and observations. And as much as we love talking about history, we love sharing it even more. All right, Clayton, we'll catch you next week.
See you later, Jeff.